Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, welcome to the Figure It Out cast for March 2025. Yeah, we're already 3 months into this year. And I'm your host, Adam Koralik, and we're going to be talking all about a whole bunch of video game stuff. This is a Patreon-backed podcast, and that means it gets supported not only by people like you, but also people who get to participate in the show. If you join my Patreon, you can get early access to videos, you can get shout-outs, you can pick subjects, or you can even be on it, such as Joseph. Joseph, welcome back.
Hello. Thanks for having me back.
Always. Yeah, without further ado, let's just get into it, because we have a lot to talk about today. So the first thing we wanted to do here is, because you get to pick a subject, but you didn't have anything, but then I found something that I thought was kind of perfect for us, because we have one thing we very much like talking about, which is really kind of somewhat, I'm going to be honest with you guys, we really like to dive into the state of Xbox, and frankly, any excuse to do that is a pretty good one to us. So, at the time of recording, very recently, the other day, the infamous Peter Moore, who was once head honcho at Sega of America, later famously would leave Sega to go over to Xbox and run it for quite a few years before leaving them to go to EA. And I think after he left EA, he started running like a British football team. But anyway, I believe the man is retired now. He did an interview with a buddy of mine, actually, Danny Pena, who runs Gamer Talk Radio. And they just sat down, they chatted about a lot of things, and more or less presented, with the question about, what do you think Microsoft wants to do with hardware? Peter Moore had an interesting reaction in which he basically said something that you and I have said for a long time, and frankly, I know I've got videos going back over a decade saying this. He effectively just said that Microsoft would love to get out of hardware if they could, and that they're essentially just kind of trapped there. If they could deliver games directly to your television, I think was the quote, then they would do exactly that. And that says a lot. So, all right, before we get into my thoughts on that, why don't we hear yours?
I mean, well, I'm sure we're going to have similar thoughts on this. It's basically a, yeah, we know type deal. Granted, he was asked what they're going to, about how they feel about doing hardware and stuff, what he thinks they feel about doing hardware, because, he doesn't work there anymore. But
that is correct.
Let's be honest. Every single source on the history of, the original Xbox, even just flat out was Microsoft is okay, we need to get into the living room. Who can we get to make the box for us? And the answer was no one, because there was no money in just making the box. Everyone that they talked to, about it, who usually that they would go to for, hey, you build PCs, you build Windows PCs, you want to build a console first? So, no, there's no money in that. And even if someone was dumb enough to think about it, the 3DO had just come out and flopped, and it would have had, and in that situation, the Xbox would have had to have been 3DO priced to work.
Just to clarify the timeline for people there, Microsoft obviously didn't start making the Xbox the year it came out. They started getting interested in games in the mid-90s around that time. So, yes.
Yeah. So
okay, go on.
Right. So, I mean, hearing, the second head of Xbox basically go, yeah, no, if Xbox had the ability to do it, they get out of hardware immediately, it's not surprising. Because they never wanted to be there in the first place. Not really. But
yeah, I mean, I hate to say how much I agree. Okay, so the history lesson there for those who don't know, basically Microsoft only got into it in the first place was because of Sony. Yeah. Because they were really concerned. This is going to sound ridiculous, especially if you're younger, but in the mid-90s, especially in the late 90s, there was a very legitimate fear that the concept of the home computer, the PC, would cease to exist. Keep in mind, the PC as we know it, its infancy as a consumer product that was somewhat popular, really only came about in the mid-80s. And your average person really didn't have one until the early to mid-90s. But there was this legitimate fear that by the end of the 90s, game consoles were going to replace PCs, because at the time, your average person, obviously not your more technically proficient people, but your average person really just saw PCs as a way to maybe game online, send an email, browse a website. And when you hear that the Dreamcast has a keyboard and it has a mouse and it can go on websites and it can send emails, and the PlayStation 2 can do that, even the Sega Saturn can do that, that made Microsoft kind of concerned, because obviously their bread and butter is Windows. Always has been, probably always will be. And so they basically got into the Xbox solely so they could control the direction of that industry. They didn't really ever want to do it. They tried to integrate with Sega, and Sega was somewhat cooperative, but not enough for their tastes. And and that strategy did work. And then I think we've talked about this before, but really the
Several
360,
times.
the 360, they stuck around only because they had spent so much to get their foot in the door that they thought maybe they could actually make this successful. And they probably would have if it hadn't been for the Red Rings of Death fiasco. Mm-hmm. But then after that, it's been downhill ever since. But really, the reason they're still there is just more or less because it's like a jobs program at this point. There's no longer a fear of losing the PC as a concept, but now it's more about needing to support that ecosystem, because that's again why all Xbox content immediately goes to PC and everything. And now there's such a technological and IP conglomerate, I have no idea what would even happen if they truly got out of gaming. But that's not what they're saying they want.
They're not getting out of gaming. No, they did not spend that ridiculous amount of money on Activision Blizzard to just say, nope, we're done.
Yeah, exactly. So, but to get out of hardware, that part I wholeheartedly believe. I mean, here's one that'll mess with your mind. Are you aware, at least at the time of this recording, there is no version of an Xbox console in production with a disk drive?
That shocks me a lot less than it should.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. So every version of the Xbox now, so they still do versions of the S and the X, but they have now got that like diskless version of the X, and that apparently is the only one they're producing now.
Oh.
So unless something changes, but like that's been the case for the past few months, and that hasn't been much of a story because nobody has really cared, because Microsoft has been doing a lot to just make you not care about the disk drive.
I mean,
and it's depressing, but it's not shocking.
I mean, even like someone like me who's been a game collector for a while, and like in Gen 8 was like very much a physical buyer. At this point, most of my gaming, at least for modern stuff, is shifted to PC, unless if it's for something that has a terrible port. And if it has a terrible PC port, the console I'm getting it for is not Xbox. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, you know, what else do you even say at this point? Like, you know, this is just more writing on the wall, and it's not really any part of this is particularly shocking to us. It's more a matter of like, what do we think they do the next time around? And if I mean, I know we're jumping ahead by like literally years here, but no part of me is going to be surprised when inevitably Microsoft talks about their new hardware in a couple of years, and they're like, we're moving beyond the disc. We are no longer limited by the disc. You know, like they're going to pitch it that way. Mm-hmm. And be like, everything now exists perfectly within our digital ecosystem. Every game you ever want, it's all here at a click of a button. Like, that's how they're going to present it.
Of course.
And I think that is how inevitably we're going to silently witness the physical disc, the physical media option from them die. And I guarantee you Sony will do the same thing. Sony, I mean, dude, we could talk about them too. Like, clearly they don't want to do this anymore either. You know, like the PS5 Pro obviously ships without a disc drive.
Right.
Sony themselves, who owns Blu-ray and has a vested interest in its success, even they are like, we're going to stop manufacturing of Blu-ray writable discs. And oddly, they probably would have shut down more as far as Blu-ray sales go, as far as like real releases. If not for the fact, there's actually been an ironic slight surge lately, only because a lot of people are getting really sick of streaming. But when I say a lot, it's still ultimately a niche group.
Yeah,
it's just more.
It's just enough that they're like, maybe there's still actually money in disc for now.
Precisely. It's not enough to like make everybody say, we're going back to all physical. Like, we're not insane over here. We know that that's not how it's going to go. The only thing that could do that is if like we had some sort of massive external problem where the internet is down, like, dude, we're talking like nuclear war levels or like government oversight where it's like, okay, you have to do, like, we're talking like crazy external stuff. And if that's happening, we have way worse problems.
Exactly.
So yeah. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of an I told you so moment, I suppose, or just a reminder of what's inevitably coming. So please, everybody, I'm imagining a lot of you who are listening to this show are physical media enthusiasts. If you care about the history beyond just the gaming content in of itself, then get it while you still can and enjoy it while you still can, because this is like probably the last couple of years where you're going to be able to forge new memories in that regard. Save for the Switch 2, probably. Maybe we'll talk about that in a bit. But
right.
Yeah, anything you want to say on all this?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, one thing that, like, obviously, like they said, if they could just like send it to the TV, they would. I'm just wondering, like, obviously, we were talking about how they no longer are going to want discs, like Xbox and even Sony specifically. But how long do you think that they might even bother, like, having to make a new dedicated box when you think about it?
Microsoft?
Like, yeah. Do you...
That's a very good question. I think they got one more in them. I think they have one more. Because the problem that they will run into is it's very obvious to all of us, and I mean, who've been paying attention to this. I mean, I've been talking about this for like over a decade. Again, they want something to be able to distribute Xbox ecosystem content on. That is why they have tried in phones, they have tried in tablets, they have tried in direct broadcast to televisions, but nothing has really stuck. The only thing that's kind of worked is their own box delivery method. And until they have an alternate, they're just gonna have to keep doing that. And I mean, I'm not technically creative enough to know what else they could do short of getting Xbox Game Pass as an app for the PlayStation 5. I mean, or the Switch, I suppose, Switch 2, whatever. But said box, here's the thing, dude. Said box without a disk drive and... Okay, let me rephrase. The box can have two different versions. And what I mean by that is it depends on how much we're still depending on local hardware for performance. So if you are doing everything exclusively through cloud streaming, where all the processing of the game is done entirely within their ecosystem, and it essentially is just sending you a hyper fast signal to be able to play that without any latency, then the box you have needs to be little more than a Roku. It just has to receive a signal. However, if local processing is still necessary, things like, RAM and, a CPU, all that stuff.
Then they'll have to keep doing a box because no one's going to make a TV strong enough to run an Xbox, whatever the next one is.
Exactly. So to that end, I think they have at least one real box left in them, probably Sans disk drive. But after that, it's anybody's guess. Like, you could be at a point where they're like, okay, cloud streaming is sufficient enough. We can do it on just this. They call it the Xbox, and it's literally like a little box. It's like a little cube that doesn't do anything other than stream. It has, a broadband port. It has a USB port or two, and that's it. And then, maybe after that, TVs are at the point where that signal is good enough. I don't know, because that also assumes that certain technological advances in the games themselves don't continue, which they inevitably will. So, like, the problem you're always going to run into is bandwidth issues. Like, there is not bandwidth issues anymore to just, like, say, stream a Sega Genesis game, but that's because it's 30 plus years old. Modern content can't do it, but as modern content itself gets bigger, connections must get bigger. But are the connections big enough to be good for that? You know what I mean?
Especially across the entire United States. Like, no.
And that's just our country. That doesn't apply to every.
Well, yeah, no. I mean, our country in particular, our infrastructure is not the best.
Yeah.
And there's really nothing they can do to really fix that because, like, there, because of how big the country is. Like, parts of the country, it's like in rural areas, it's a lot more expensive to put a good connection there than it is in like a city. But
Oh yeah.
so
Yeah, I know. It's there's a lot of problems that go with this that will always exist. And that's why to answer your question, I do believe we still have at least one more physical box that does local processing in us. Probably more, to be honest. But I think that question is answerable. It's really the disk drive issue, and I would bet at this point they're going to go without a disk drive because they've effectively already made that decision, but silently. And so the question then becomes, if they... Do you even own an Xbox currently, like a current gen?
I do. Yes, I have a Series X. I
Okay,
barely use it. I got it like when a couple of years ago when like I first got Game Pass. I was like, you know what? I have the spare money. I might as well get the box so I can have the games on Game Pass that aren't on PC. And then it just turns out that what I wanted to play for the most part was on PC. So
Right. So then let me ask you, if they came out with another one and had no disk drive, it was just the local box, would you get it?
potentially it depends on if there are any games that are truly Xbox exclusive that I would want to play enough. Because again, I've already transitioned mostly to PC gaming, so
Okay.
via Steam. So like, I'm not going to not get a game because there's no physical version. Although on consoles,
Yeah,
I'll generally, if I'm going to buy it and it's the same price, I'm getting the physical version. But
Okay, yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Personally, you already know where I stand. I would not. It would take an unbelievable force to get me to do that. Like, oh look, we're finishing up the entirety of the Shenmue saga exclusively on this box. All right, fine.
I'll
Like
I'll get it. I'll play the games and then I'll sell it.
No, I would probably keep it as the Shenmue box,
Oh, yeah,
and that's
that's
about it. But that's I'd even put stickers on it, be like, "This is the physical edition of Shenmue 4. Is this rinky-dink little box?" But yeah, other than that, yeah, no, probably not much I would do. But yeah, anything else you want to say on this?
Not really. I mean, we basically covered a lot of the stuff that we could with this, especially specifically to Xbox. I mean, like, we can go on more of a tangent on PlayStation if we really wanted to, but we could probably wait until Sony does something.
Yeah, I'd rather wait for more information. Yeah, I'd rather wait for more information from them before we just start jumping around. But we have plenty of speculation we can do next. So, Joseph, we're going to thank you for that subject, and we'll move on to the next one here, which comes from Spencer Per Year. Spencer, I hope you're okay. I haven't heard from you in a couple of months, so I just keep picking stuff from you. But in this case, I thought it'd be a good opportunity, since we're talking all about all this Xbox stuff, and we obviously have big news right around the corner. Let's talk about some Nintendo Switch 2. So last month, Abdullah and I talked about it, but you and I did not. And so I thought I want to get your take on it.
Okay, well, so far, what we know about the Switch 2 is that it's the Switch 1, but bigger and more powerful and with slightly different Joy-Cons, and it looks cool, and it maybe might have a mouse, maybe, if that part of the trailer was not just for show. But generally, it's basically Nintendo is doing what we did last time, but better, which is the smart business move anyway. But I don't necessarily know how well that's going to actually work out for them, but at least if the Switch 2 somehow bombs, they could point and be like, look, we didn't do anything crazy like what happened with the Wii U. This is not our fault. This made sense. But I am excited, though, because it would be nice to get a Switch games with more power, or games from Nintendo with more power available to them, because the Switch is definitely showing its age at this point. Although not as badly as I thought it would be. When I was playing Tears of the Kingdom, I'm yeah, okay, this is running at 30 FPS, but it has no business running this good. We should be in the tens easily with what it's doing. So yeah. Pretty constantly.
To be fair, though, that is Nintendo in-house, and they are better at getting the most out of their hardware than anybody else.
That's true, but at this point, our third parties, other than indies, still porting stuff to the Switch. I mean, I know they did it a lot in the earlier years, but
you have a good point there. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I mean, they might do it again on the Switch 2 now now that they're closer to PS5 and Xbox Series X, but
By that you mean they're PS4 Pros, sure, but yeah.
well, I mean, I did say closer, like because
Yeah, no, it's definitely closer.
Games to that thing.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. So basically, at the time we're recording this, we still got like a few weeks from the announcement. But by the time most of you are hearing this, we're only like a couple of days away from Nintendo doing this big thing where they're going to have a whole bunch of like a Nintendo Direct where they're going to talk about the information on the Switch 2, probably a lot more about what it's capable of, probably showing some games, probably giving us a release date, etc. Do you want to speculate on any of that?
I mean, we could do a little bit of speculation, or more accurately, I guess, say what we want. Like, I definitely
Yeah, you could do that. I mean, like, this is purely speculative, dude.
Yeah.
Like, almost everything we say could be wrong here. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, well, I mean, we already know that the Switch 2 is going to be backwards compatible with the Switch. I hope it boosts the performance of the games that it plays in backwards compatibility, but I doubt that's going to actually be the case. I'm sure that the way it's going to do it is the way like the 3DS did it, or the way the Wii U did backwards compatibility, or the Wii did backwards compatibility with GameCube for that matter, where it's similar chip that's stronger, lower clock speed than match previous chip. Now system thinks it's a Switch. Is what I assume is what they're going to do.
I mean, you present a good point. I don't think there has ever been a Nintendo system that did backwards compatibility where the backwards compatibility in any way enhanced the original, with the sole potential exception being maybe the way the Game Boy Advance could handle Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, just because it had that code built in, so it was useful in more situations. But like even that's an extreme stretch. It's not like, so backwards compatibility, I think an entire generation got screwed up by the PlayStation 2 because we assumed that because the PS2 did PS1 games better, that's how backwards compatibility is supposed to work. But that usually is not the case. And so I think you're totally right there. Like the Wii U technically had that 1080p mode for Wii games, but it didn't actually do anything other than just upscale to an arbitrary benchmark, and most side-by-side analysis actually says it looks worse that way. Unless you run it down at 480p, which is what it's supposed to be at. The GameCube, famously the Wii actually did the video output worse than the GameCube did. So that's interesting. And I'm not as familiar with the DS and 3DS lines. I would assume they basically
it's basically one of the chips they had in there was the same main CPU as the DS, so when it goes into DS mode, that it uses that and it gets clocked down. Basically, it's basically just all of it has been hardware based. Like it either has the hardware inside it, or the new chip is an upgrade of the previous chip, and they could just clock down back to the previous specs.
Okay, all right. So then that tracks. I too, much like you, would love to see a scenario where the Switch Switch 2, goes ahead and does like enhancements to Switch 1 games, maybe some generic type of enhancement, although I don't expect that. I do think it's possible we'll see certain games that get like patches to be enhanced on there, because we're kind of in that era where that's just kind of expected now. Nintendo might do it a few times. But the other companies that I would think would do that, and like, who actually has a very good track record of this is actually Ubisoft. Ubisoft has a tendency to revisit their titles and then give them big updates. Like only a couple months ago, they did an update for Far Cry 5, a game that's been out now for 8 years. And gave it like full 4K 60 support on like Xbox Series X, like just for free. You just have that.
Was the update good?
Yeah, no, it works. And they did that. Ubisoft has a tendency to do that with a lot of their games. Now I don't think they do this out of the kindness of their hearts. My guess is by doing it, they can then advertise like, hey, did you like that game? Go rebuy it for the first time. But really it's the same game. They just, maxed out the settings or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So basically it's an opportunity to resell it digitally, obviously. But at least if you're a legacy purchaser of the game, it will work.
Right.
So it would not shock me if like Ubisoft in particular patches a bunch of their Switch games for the Switch 2 in an effort to resell them. Like they did that Switch Mario Rabbids game. Do you remember those?
They did. Yeah. I was about to say they did 2 of them.
Right. Right. So Ubisoft made those games. So it wouldn't shock me if they're like, hey, if you want to play those games on Switch 2, there's a free, like, full 1080p, enhancement, because it's not going to be 4K. But it's like a full 1080p 60 FPS update, only works on Switch 2, and it's free. All you got to do is go buy the actual game or whatever. So that would not shock me. And if they're doing it, I think that there's got to be other companies that do that. They just come to mind because I see them do it the most commonly and the most out of the blue. But I could see that. But that's not exactly backwards compatibility, obviously. That's just, patches.
Yeah.
But that's the closest I think we're going to get to something like that.
I could definitely see that. Like, if there's a way that they could make it so that the patch would only download or only run on Switch 2, then yeah.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's
assuming Nintendo, lets the system see all of its RAM when it's in Switch mode. But
I mean, that, to be fair, that's already the case. Like, it's not like if you go out and try to play Far Cry 5 on the base Xbox One VCR model, you're going to get the 4K update. Oh. So, like, yeah. So, yeah, obviously. I think that that's not an unrealistic goal. Beyond that, are there any like titles in particular you think you might see, anything like that?
Well, obviously, there's going to be a new Zelda. There's going to be a new Mario. I don't know if Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is going to be a like a dual release like Breath of the Wild was, or if it's going to also be... Well, yeah, I don't know if it's going to be on both, but we know it's on Switch 1.
Well, that's the ultimate can of worms there, isn't it? Because, we haven't seen many updates out of that, kind of famously. I mean, here's the fun thing about that. When Gamers Club Unlocked from Best Buy was still a thing, I pre-ordered that back in 2017 with that discount, which eventually, by the way, Best Buy, voided everybody's pre-orders of that game.
Of course.
Yeah, but it was sitting there for, now 8 years. It actually may never see the light of day on that system. If it does, you are right. It'll probably be like the Swan Song last game. That or a iteration of Mario.
Well, we already saw a new trailer of it a couple of directs ago that had the Switch 1 logo on it. So it's okay. Well, unless if Nintendo changes its mind and only makes it on Switch 2, it's still, as far as we know, set for Switch 1.
All right, well then that's good. But basically where I was going with this is I think it's very realistic that both of those games will exist on both platforms. That you will get Metroid Prime 4, you'll probably get, hell, maybe we can combine concepts here. Metroid Prime 4 will be a Switch game, but they will give it basically they have an updated patch, an updated build that only works on Switch 2. That way you effectively make the one game and you sell it twice. Mario Kart 9, I would bet probably a very similar situation, simply because that game will sell a ridiculous amount of units if it's on both systems.
Yeah.
The Mario Kart 8 proved that. So I think that's those two games I think are highly likely to cross over on both platforms. As far as they'll exist on both, I'm not saying they'll have any sort of cross compatibility. But even that I wouldn't necessarily rule out, at least with Mario Kart 9. But yeah, we'll see. I would not be entirely shocked if Metroid Prime 4 and Mario Kart 9 are Switch 2 launch titles and Swan Song Switch titles.
Yeah. It's not like Nintendo hasn't done this multiple times before in multiple generations. So
exactly. And if you want to hit it out of the park, that is a great way to start. Because you will instantly make people want this console. And even for the people who can't afford it, they're still going to buy the original Switch version of those games just because they've been wanting them for so long.
Oh, I just
Mario
realized
Kart 9.
I still haven't played Metroid Prime 2 or 3. I guess I have to go dig out the Wii U.
Well, have fun with that. Is the second one on the Wii U? I thought that was just a GameCube game.
Trilogy came out on the Wii and it got released digitally, and I have a physical copy.
Oh, right. Okay, got it.
But yeah.
Yeah, I tend to forget the Wii a lot of the times.
Yeah.
Well, not so much I forget it. I forget what games were released for it because it's dead to me. But that's a different discussion. Yeah, so anything else you want to say on Switch 2? Or do you think you'll get one?
Yes.
What do you think the price point will be? Okay, yes.
Yes, I'm getting one. I'd expect the price point to probably be at most like $3.99. I can't see Nintendo being able to justify going any higher than that, but I also can't see them being able to release it at $2.99. Although maybe they'll surprise me.
So I completely agree. $2.99 I don't think is realistic. $3.99 is what I probably would also agree with, although I won't talk about it, but I'm a little concerned that a lot of recent events in the world might make it closer to $4.99 after a whole lot of stupid factors, but
right.
$3.99 is
okay.
Let's just
Yeah.
leave it at that. $3.99 is probably what I'll circle it at. Yeah, I think that's not totally unrealistic. And that's, of course, we're talking before taxes and stuff
all
like
that stuff, yeah.
But
now, if that mouse function is true, I wonder what they're going to be able to do it for, because I don't know about you, but I've tried using the mouse like when I've been like sitting in bed or like on a couch, and it doesn't really work all that well.
Yeah, that I agree with you. I think that's, I don't know. Nintendo will show us what they want us to see, but if I had to guess, I'd say it's going to be there more so just to be able to claim it's there. I think it might be one of those features they add to a system so that developers can take advantage of it, and a lot of them won't, and it'll just be kind of a token thing that eventually you realize wasn't used very much.
Okay, so we'll probably get new Mario Paint and maybe Mario Maker 3, and that's probably all that will use it.
Or, it can have additional compatibility with other things. Without using it, it's really hard to judge it.
Right.
So I don't know. But, I at no point, right, so when I saw that trailer, originally, you might know this, I was actually on Tinian Island, which is an American island in the Pacific, about 3 hours south of Japan.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
It's only really known for, at the end of World War II, that's where the bombers took off to drop the atomic bombs on Japan. So the bombs they were finished being assembled on Tinian. And they have bomb pits, whatever. So I was there at that time, and I filmed my reaction video in front of said bomb pits. The reason I bring that up is the mouse feature, which is in that trailer, washed over me so completely that I forgot to even acknowledge it.
So that's to be fair, I didn't realize that people were even thinking that was anything other than the Joy-Cons moving around in a certain way until everyone else started saying, does that mean it's a mouse feature? So for all we know, it's not even a thing.
So you're saying it might have just been a little cutesy animation that everybody just...
That's what I assumed at first. But
I guess that is what my brain thought, although a lot of people since then have said, no, it is in fact some sort of mouse support. But I guess we don't really know that. You now have put a lot of doubt in my mind. So I guess...
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks. Well, it doesn't matter. We'll find this out soon enough.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Anything else you want to say?
What's the date of that direct again? It's for...
April 2nd.
April 2nd. Okay, so we'll definitely see that before the next podcast.
Oh, 100%. We'll probably be recording very shortly after it. So I hope you guys enjoy Switch 2 talk. Yeah. That'll be a weird one because... we're getting, we're kind of going a little meta here, but I imagine you'll want to talk about that, and Abdullah will want to talk about that. So I'll have to figure that one out. But whatever, worry about that next month. Okay, but for this month, anything else you want to speculate on Switch 2? Because you've already said yes, you'll get it. I assume you're going to try and get it right away based on the expedience in which you responded to that question.
Probably, yeah.
Price point seems realistic, and you also don't seem too concerned about that either way. So that's. I guess there's not really
if it's closer to $4.99, I might need to actually consider waiting a little bit. But
okay,
also,
all right. See, that's what I was going to ask. What's the price point at which you're just like, no, I'm out.
And even then, that's just because a lot of stuff has happened in the last couple of months
we'll leave it at
that I'm still recovering from. So
you and everybody else, man.
Yeah. But I mean, for me, it's like even beyond that, like
that's fair.
Surprise medical bills and all that nice fun stuff.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, but without being a downer there, so we'll just bring it back up here if we can. Price is, other than availability, is the only thing that would really knock you out at this point.
Yeah, and that's dependent solely on how long it takes to release and like what my situation is.
Sorry, I got a spam call.
Oh, okay. Well,
just all right. So I asked you, price is the only thing that would knock you out, and then you were going to respond. So just go from there.
Yeah, like the price is the only thing that could possibly make it that I wouldn't get it immediately, and well, besides not being able to get it, but it's really going to depend on when this actually releases and what my situation's like. Like if it's like 7 or 8 months from now, I'll probably be fine. If it's surprise, it comes out in a month, which it's not going to be the case. But if it's like that, then I might have to actually consider and think and wait and like how many games on this thing are actually going to be out immediately that I'm going to be playing. Type deal.
Okay. I can see that's reasonable. A lot of people are kind of circling June as the expectation, citing that basically with the first Switch, like we obviously knew about it going back to, what was it? Project
NX.
Cafe was Wii U. NX, right? Project NX. And then like in December, they sort of of 2016, they talked more about it. Then they did like a big formal very late January, early February thing, kind of like they're about to do in April, and then they launched it in March. So it was only like a month or two really later. People are saying April is too early to release it. May is not impossible, but for some reason June seems to be more of the sweet spot. The last console that I know of that launched in June was the Sega Saturn in North America. So I don't know if they really want to do that, but maybe that's the perfect time.
Well, if it's not a surprise thing that they're rushing,
right? There's that, but also couple it with the fact that June is now associated with new video game announcement time, because that was when E3 always was, but E3 is no longer a thing. So if you were to launch the console and then do a whole bunch of here is our big Nintendo conference of what you're expecting a fake E3 to be like, here's everything that's out right now, but they don't do a surprise, just like you said, that actually could have a lot of juice behind it.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what they're thinking. I don't know. I'm just speculating completely.
Yeah, we don't really know what Nintendo's going to do. Like you said, the Switch came out in March. We knew about that. That was going to be the case. Back in before Christmas of 2016. Which, to be fair, Nintendo knew they weren't selling any more Wii U, so it's not like they had to worry about cannibalizing sales. But yeah, but I mean, now that
that was
established that they're not releasing in fall.
Wasn't that when we were full in NES Classic? Phase. Yeah.
The whole reason that thing existed so Nintendo had a box to sell.
A product, right. And then the same with the SNES Classic was really just in case the Switch doesn't work. And then the reason you never got an N64 Classic is because the Switch worked. Mm-hmm. But, yeah. All right. Anything else you want to add on this, or are we done? You want to move on? What do you want to do?
I think we're pretty done at this point. You can kind of hear my voice circling around a bit.
Yeah. All right, well, cool. Thank you, Spencer, for sort of selecting that, but at least sponsoring that particular subject. Let's put it that way. So, speaking of Patreon backers who deserve a shout-out, we have a round of shout-outs. All the following people are Patreon backers that are at that tier in which they get a shout-out. We've got Jeb Malcolm, Loke, Michael Kelly, Sega Steve, and Trey Wagner. Once again, that is Jeb Malcolm, Loke, Michael Kelly, Sega Steve, and Trey Wagner. Thank you so much for your support. And if anybody out there listening wants to sign up to get early access to this or any of my videos, again, Patreon link in the description. Thank you so much. And we're back. We are now returning. We've got Abdullah. How you doing, Abdullah?
Hey, I'm doing fine. Doing well. Happy to be back as always.
All right, so you guys know the routine. Abdullah, you obviously do too. We got some subjects to cover. You got to pick one, but you didn't really have one, so I kind of came up with one for you, and I thought it'd be just kind of fun to have an excuse to just talk about collecting because we both like doing that.
Yeah, and
so
the question is very, very interesting when it comes to my aspect of it, though.
I know that's kind of why I wanted your take on this because I think you and I will both give non-standard answers to this question. But first, let me present the premise to everybody. Basically, the question is, when it comes to collecting, if you could, what 3 regions of the world would you like to just be plopped into to go game hunting in? And I think that the standard answer for most people, at least the most people that would listen to this, is Japan. That's kind of a given. So, Abdullah, you can obviously say Japan, but I'm genuinely curious what you would say. And then, of course, I'll give my take as well. Go ahead.
Okay, so it's 3 regions, right? So
Yes,
to
3
me,
regions.
yeah. So the well-defined regions are North America, Europe or PAL, and Japan.
Let me refine that question slightly then. Because when I said regions, the only reason I selected that terminology was I was kind of considering Europe a single entity, but obviously Asia gets split up a lot more because it has a lot more content through different areas. But you can basically narrow it down to countries or however you really like to phrase it. Okay, now go ahead.
Got it. So to me, because I'm in a region where we mostly, we source it from these regions generally. That's what happens. Although, I know you've seen, you know about these, for example, these 3DS games that are usually. There are 2 variants North American. One is the standard US, and there's another one that's like the World Edition. You've seen that,
Yes.
right? Yes. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I would
there's
say
odd additions. Yeah, you guys also got, what was that, Arab drift cars? I still want
yeah,
that.
yeah. And I still have it. That's the funny part.
Yeah, it's someday, my friend, someday. But anyway, go ahead.
So maybe if I'm in the US or so. Anyway, we go back from that point. So we don't have a well-defined, like I would say, well-defined exclusives or a well-defined region. I would say like North America or Europe or something like that or Japan. But the point of the matter is to me because I grew up mostly with North American games. The shop that I used to get mostly North American games, and even when it came to the World Edition, you would find that they are, I think, mostly, if not all, North American based. So they would work on North American consoles, essentially the same. It's just like a distribution. So to me, the answer would not be Japan. It would be actually North America, which is funny because to you that's the norm.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
the norm. That's just you. You're just okay. That's just going game hunting as usual.
Well,
But
let
to
me-
me, that's not
okay.
the case.
All right, then that's fine. Let me ask you, within that answer, you obviously mean the US and Canada specifically. If you had to pick one of the 2, which one would you do?
Because of the internet and the many people that go game hunting and document it, I would say the U.S. because I would have a lot of groundwork to base myself from. Like I could find out about good shops here and there because of the many YouTubers or the many influencers that are involved. I could get an idea of how and where to go. Now I do not have, of course, a plan specifically in mind, but whenever I do go to the US, I would definitely check that out in order to be able to get those
Okay.
or do
That's
game
a-
hunting. So to
that
me,
is a good answer.
I want to experience the norm that you do. You get it?
Okay.
Yeah. It's weird game hunting here. It's mostly online, and there are resellers here, but they can trick you. I've been tricked multiple times with fake games.
Okay. What would be your number 2?
Oh, that's definitely Japan for sure. Number 1, and
Okay.
the main reason is right now, if anybody asks me why would you go to Japan, is to look for the Wii U exclusives that I'm missing. That's like the primary goal. even though it's very specific. That'll be like the first thing I'll be hunting for, and then I'll be hunting for like variants of stuff I have or Japanese exclusives. I'm into Pokemon, so pretty sure I'll find a lot of things in there.
Yes, it's unavoidable. It's
Yeah,
unavoidable.
and they're
Dude.
like anime too. So
Well, yeah, that you'd be very happy there. I will say this: the Japanese in the last few years, the game stores have really figured out that a lot of the tourists are coming there specifically for Pokemon. So, unlike every other game series that gets kind of mixed in together, they usually have a specific Pokemon cabinet of just items of Pokemon stuff because they know that that's a hot seller. So, you'd probably do very well.
yeah, hot seller, but at the same time, what about the prices?
Oh yeah, that I can't help you with because I don't pay attention to Pokemon or anime. But gaming wise, it's yeah. If it's just like other stuff, sure. But I also have more, let's say, junkier taste. I like to pick up a lot of stuff because no one cares about it. I rarely go after things most people would generally think are worth picking up, but that's me. But
Yeah,
this isn't about me, so
it's like what you
go
did
on.
with the Wii U, kind of, right? It's like the console that nobody
Yes,
cares about. I also have the same kind of ideology.
I guess that's true. But you also like stuff that's popular, like Pokemon. I do not, but I'm a
Oh,
hipster
okay.
douchebag, so it's
Oh,
okay.
okay. So, okay, that makes it okay. That's probably the different part. But I also have a liking towards stuff that people don't focus on. Like I want to get a Pippin. That's one of the things I want to
Yeah,
get.
so the Pippin, you can find the console. It's the games that are almost impossible. Um, but I will say, like, so I'm the type of person, if I find Pippin games, I will pick them up. Like, that's a perfect example because, like, nobody, except for guys like you and me, really care about that kind of thing. But your average popular thing, I don't care about, something like Pokemon, whatever. But then I'm also the other extreme where I want to pick up stuff that people want but they can't afford, like some rare shooter collection or something like that. Stuff like that, although I don't necessarily always get it. It's down to how much it costs in that case. But I'm odd. I'm on the extremes and not too much in the middle on that. But that, again, this isn't about me. So your first choice would be the United States and your second choice would be Japan. Is that correct?
That is correct. And my third choice would be here's something. I've had an interest in South American stuff because I know Sega is big there. I think it's under the name Tech Toy or something.
So when you say South America, you're specifically referring to Brazil, I take it.
Yeah, Brazil, because I know
Okay.
that they have a special Dreamcast there.
Yeah, the
It's not
Tectoy
their.
one.
Yeah, it's. I mean, not special to them. It's not special, but stuff like that I want to hunt for, like these tech
Okay.
toys. Or South America has an interesting side. I think the Master System's there. I don't know how long has it been there.
The Master System has been there from 1983 to today. It is still
It's
active.
still going on, really?
It is
And they
still
make
going. Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, they
okay.
make new stuff with
That's.
it. They make new Master Systems. They make new games. This is still a thing.
Oh, okay, okay. That changes everything. That makes me really want to go.
Oh, okay.
Because, it made me like, okay, I was interested to go, but not keen on it. But now I am.
Well, okay.
But I
So,
wouldn't place it on North America. I mean, when you say United States, I also include Canada, but mainly United States. But Japan next. But can't top these two.
okay. All right. No, that's completely fair. And it's all right. So I'll do mine because it's funny what your list is. Now, to reiterate to the audience here, obviously I am an American, so I don't get super excited about game hunting in America because to me it's just, as he put it, the norm. Whatever store I go into is already American stuff. So I actually do like game hunting in Canada, but usually just for oddball exclusives and sometimes better deals, etc. But that's a different thing. Obviously Japan. I love going to Japan. You guys know this. I've got tons of videos going to Japan. I've been there, what is it, 22, 23 times now? I have no idea. I lost track. Abdullah, I don't even know if you know this. I don't know if you saw it. I did a game hunting video that just came out there. One of 7 of just like all around hunting in Japan last January. There was that much content. So you'll enjoy that. It's a lot of game stores and stuff. So hopefully you'll check it out. And that goes for the rest of you. But anyway, so I obviously love Japan, but I have been there so many times and seen so many parts of it that while I still enjoy it, it has kind of lost the luster because I've been going there for nearly a decade now, which means I'm very familiar with what to expect. So, much like he said, you don't really care. I almost consider it home turf at this point, as weird as that sounds. So it would not be my first choice anymore. Now, and I'm very glad you said it, my first choice is actually Brazil. For the exact same reason you cited. It's like this alternate Sega universe where they won and like they're still sort of making stuff down there. Now I'm in luck because, and this is to any Brazilians that are listening, I'm going to be a guest at a convention there in July in Sao Paulo called Retro Game Con. So highly recommend you guys come out there. I'm going to go out there for like a little over a week, and my plan is to...
And the Pluto's gonna be there, right?
The Pluto will be there. Yes, good. I'm glad you brought that up. So yeah, I'll be down there and I'm going to do a lot of game hunting. I'm going there with like 2 suitcases. And the thing with Brazil is it's not just like weird variants of games or whatever. There's like consoles you've never heard of that are official. And it's strange. Like the one I always point to is the Gradiente NES. So the very long story short with this is in Brazil, when the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System, Famicom, whatever you want to call it, was relevant, Nintendo went to a company in Brazil and was like, we don't understand the Brazilian market, but we want our system there. Can you make an NES for us that you distribute? And Nintendo fundamentally did not understand how Brazilian culture works. So they were like, okay, sure, we'll outsource it, no problem. And so the Brazilian company called Gradiente decides to make their NES with Nintendo's permission. But it was cheaper and easier to use surplus Atari 7800 shells than it was to design anything else. So they put the official guts of an NES inside of what looks like their direct competitor's console. And then they also used for the controller a Sega Genesis controller. This was all official. And Nintendo like freaked out. And they're like, you can't do this. So they kind of pulled their support from it. But it was released anyway. So its history is it was endorsed. And it even had games made specifically for it. All by Activision. Like there's a version of Ghostbusters for it and a few other games that were made specifically for that machine, even though it's just an NES, making it something that I really want. And to them, that's just normal. Whereas there's a whole bunch of weirdo Brazilian stuff like that, especially because Sega always played ball. They were like, yeah, do whatever you want. So there's all these different iterations of the Dreamcast, the Saturn, especially the Genesis or Mega Drive and the Master System. And there's exclusive games made for those systems. Well, more so the Mega Drive and Master System. But, that's the kind of weird stuff I want to get. And fortunately for me, I'm going to have that opportunity this summer. So I assume you agree with that general idea. That's the kind of stuff you want to do. Yeah, it sounds like you're enjoying yourself.
Yeah. It's
all right,
mainly, so I'm looking at the tech toy stuff, actually. It's interesting.
Oh, hell yeah.
The Dreamcast packaging.
Yeah, the sad thing about that Dreamcast is that it basically looks the same. The thing that makes it special is the box and the fact that the system itself has like a slightly different sticker on the bottom saying, Tech Toy in Brazil and all that. And I think it runs like PAL M or something like that. It's like a weird,
exactly.
Yeah.
It's written like that, PAL M.
Yeah.
But is it blue? Is the swirl blue or red there? I think.
I don't know. I think it's kind of a mix. I think sometimes they got both. Like one on the system and one on the controller.
Yeah, because I see it on the box as red, and
yeah, that wouldn't shock me. I do know that the region coding on those is NTSCU. It's American, just like yours. They were like, we'll just repurpose the same stuff. So anybody who the Brazilians want games, they just get the American ones. The funny thing about it is there is a tech toy version of Shenmue 1. And that is, it's a chase figure. I'm going to try and find it while I'm down there. But basically with that, it's just the straight up American discs. They didn't do anything, but all of the casing is completely different and is in Portuguese. So if you only spoke Portuguese in the late 90s, early aughts, and you bought that for your Dreamcast thinking like, oh, sweet, Shenmue in Portuguese, and you turn it on, it's straight up only in English. Like there is no Portuguese in it, and that's an official release. Yeah, so there's a lot of oddities like that I would look for. Like, this won't mean as much to the Europeans, but I think it was F1 Racing on N64 or something like that. Like, it came out in Europe. We never got it, but there was actually an NTSC release of it, but Brazil only. So, like, it's stuff like that I'm like, yeah, I kind of want to pick up these weirdo things. But yeah, as you can tell, that's the one I'm by far the most excited about, and partially because I'm going to be going there, so I making a mental checklist of what to get. But
Looking forward to seeing what you're gonna pick up.
yeah, me too. But here's all right. So I have two more, and the other two, I'm there's three that I would do, but I'm trying to narrow it down. And I think that I have made that decision. So number two on that list would probably be Hong Kong. So the interesting thing about Hong Kong is, given its history, it was controlled by the British until 1997, so it had a lot of official stuff, but because of its geography, you know, they often had a lot of weird imports that were slightly modified just for the Hong Kong region.
Is that where the IQE or whatever?
No, that was mainland China. That was mainland China. That wasn't Hong Kong. Hong Kong is now technically part of China. That happened after 97, but they get some measure of autonomy. But they also predominantly, or at least did, speak English. So because of their geography, because of their history, etc., it was like this weird melting pot of different video game variations. So I've never been to Hong Kong. It's on my list. But it does have a fascinating video game history. Like, there was a lot of Japanese exclusive games made for the Japanese market that got English translations, but then were only released that way in Hong Kong, particularly as late as the PS4. That was still a thing. So like, what was it? Dead or Alive 3 Beach Volleyball. Do you remember those Dead or Alive beach volleyball games? The third one never came out in North America, but it came out in Japan. But in Japan, it was Japanese only. But it, too, got an English subtitle release anyway in just Hong Kong. So that's the kind of stuff I would like to look for, just because it's like, that's all going to be weird. And then for the same reason, although it comes third on my list, is South Korea. South Korea has an extremely bizarre video game history because, again, its geography, it's right next to Japan. But until like the early 2000s, the Japanese and the Koreans really did not get along, to the point where South Korea actually had a law banning Japanese companies from doing business in South Korea. So if a company like Sega or Nintendo wanted to release the system in South Korea, they had to partner. Right? Yes, they had to partner with a Korean company, and usually it was Samsung. And that led to like the Samsung Saturn and all this other stuff. The reason that one, though, is not higher on my list, despite having so many oddities, is Korean culture is less preservationist than Japanese culture. So a lot of the time that stuff is just thrown away rather than being disposed of in, like, you know, some sort of used store. Like, I have a friend who lives in South Korea. He is like a game hunter. Like, trust me, he's good at it. And he's like, I can't find anything in South Korea anymore. Like, it's just done. Like, there aren't even stores that are selling it. There's like a museum that has a couple things, and that's about it. And it's like, that's depressing. That's why it's not as high on my list. And then Taiwan, if I was going to add a fourth, would probably be that, but for the same reason, because it's got weird things like the Super A can. But again, how I'd find them, I don't really know. But yeah, Brazil, number one. South Korea, number three. And then it would be Hong Kong is number two. So there you go.
Yeah, what about Australia? Do they have many because I don't know much about Australia in terms of the gaming scene. Is it like similar to how US and Canada, them with like the PAL region and Europe, and then you got Australia, that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a pretty good way of comparing it. So Australia is not really a mecca of retro video games. It is similar to the Canada to Europe's America, if you will. They're the same region coding, they get mostly the same stuff, but there's slight variations on the box. Instead of like the PEGI or USK system that Europe will use, PEGI being the UK specifically, Australia will have its own. But there aren't that many exclusive titles to Australia because they just kind of are a Western country that just does what everybody else does in the West. The only things I've ever found to be exclusive in Australia, at least for console games, is typically Australian football, which makes sense, the AFL. But those might appear in New Zealand. I'm not really sure about that. But the only Australian like weird exclusives are stuff that goes back a lot older than me. Things like this is real, by the way. The Dick Smith Wizard, which was a like home PC type of console thing that came out in Australia. But you're talking like mid 80s stuff, like stuff that's not really my wheelhouse. But yeah, that region did get some oddities, but it wasn't Australia. But New Zealand got a version of the Sega SG-1000. But yeah, for the most part, Australia is kind of it's kind of like British Texas. That's kind of the best way I could put it. It's
okay.
It basically is just it's the UK with like the UK on a farm. I mean that positively because I like Australia, but it's just it's just kind of a fun, weird place. But it doesn't have a whole lot of exclusive content, or at least it's not really known for it.
There is one thing though before we end this. I just got reminded. There are people here that have told me, I haven't seen this personally, so I can't really vouch for it that it's 100% true, but they told me that they go sometimes to Thailand and game hunt there. They say there are lots of Japanese stuff over there. Now I don't know how true this is, whether that's Japanese or fake, but they did tell me you could find a lot of good stuff there and for relatively good prices. I'm not confident in that, but I kind of see it though. Like as you said, Asia's very big.
Yeah, that's the problem with like kind of breaking down Asia as far as regions go, because Japan is really the only one that produces anything on a scale, and the rest of them just kind of use their stuff, but then they have like certain internal laws or whatever that change stuff. Thailand is famously like an inexpensive country to exist in, so it wouldn't really shock me if they had been importing stuff since like the 80s that they're still sitting on and they're still willing to sell for cheap. Places like Singapore will occasionally have something bizarre, but on the whole, if you're going there for the purposes of retro game hunting, there's only so many parts of this planet you can go to where it's going to be like weird enough that it's going to have a lot of stuff. I guess what I'm saying is Thailand, if you'd never been to Japan, would probably be like, holy crap, this is amazing. But if you've been to Japan a bunch of times, then it's probably less interesting. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I see it. That's because you're gonna go to if you go to the main hub, then you don't need to go to the sub
right.
bar.
And actually, that's a good way of framing Australia, because if you'd never been to Europe before, Australia would probably seem pretty exotic as far as what stuff's available there, not realizing most of it's available in Europe too. Does that make sense? All right. Well, hopefully this gave everybody out there some targets to shoot for. All right. Well, thank you, Abdullah, for that subject. So the next one up comes from a Patreon backer, Sinjeet, who obviously gets to pick one. He did respond to me, but he did admit he had no subject in mind, so we're just going to go ahead and pick one for him. And Abdullah, you probably noticed, or maybe you didn't, that at the time of this recording, only a few days ago, the PlayStation 2 celebrated its 25th birthday, which was March 4th. So I thought it might be kind of fun to just speculate on alternate timelines. What about a timeline where the PS2 failed? In what realistic scenario might that have happened? And what do we think the consequences would have been? Or like if you had to change one thing that made it fail, like, whatever. I don't know. Just spitball.
All right. So I guess here's the thing. The PS2 sold very well, mainly for, and aside from the games and all of that, the fact that it was also a DVD player, right? That was a big selling point, right? I would say that in the scenario in the scenario that it has failed, I think you would be the happiest person because Sega would probably may still exist, and the Dreamcast might have lived longer. I guess that would have happened. Maybe Sega wouldn't have gone out of the market. That's one thing. Number two, I think Xbox would be way more mainstream now. I think it would be Xbox, Nintendo, and Sega, assuming they make it. Now, assuming Sega doesn't make it, then it's going to be Microsoft and Nintendo. Now, one thing I think would may happen is that because the GameCube wasn't such a success, even though it's an amazing console, it helped Nintendo kind of shift their ideology from power to being more in the innovative side. So if the PS2 wasn't there, the GameCube would have probably taken some of those sales, probably become even more of a success. Maybe we wouldn't see consoles like the Wii. I guess that may also happen, which may lead to no Wii U's or something like that. But I think we would see eventually something like the Switch, because Nintendo has been very successful in the handheld market anyway, and that's something they've got. Maybe not the same Switch that we have right now. Maybe something similar. I'm not exactly sure, but I think that would be the trajectory we're gonna go with. I would say that I would give Sega a fair chance that they might actually make it through. Maybe if they keep on with the same mindset they had, they would have had maybe one more console. But if they use that to kind of restructure the way they do consoles, maybe they would be there until now, when you would see Sega consoles going on at the moment. But if PlayStation 2 didn't make it, Sony would have been hurt. So I don't know if they'll even attempt a PS3 or not. Maybe they would, I'm not sure.
Okay. That's your take? All right. Your guess is as good as anybody's. I mean, so like, it depends on how it failed or why it failed, etc. But let's just assume, for argument's sake, that it did. Now, you said something that was very poignant. I said this myself in my video, but there was actually a guy who commented on the video and backed it up with some numbers. So the point I made, and history has made, is that the PlayStation 2 really would not have been the success it was without the advent of DVD. Keep in mind, Sony is now claiming that the PlayStation 2 sold about 160 million units. Initially, they said 155, but
yeah, because the Switch is running.
Right, it's catching up, so they're moving the goalpost. But anyway, so they're claiming, yeah, it sold 160 million units. Now, a large part of that was the advent of DVD, because at least in North America, we were really ready to move on from VHS. Japan was ready to move on. It was adoptable easily in multiple parts of the world, and Sony introduced the cheapest DVD player on the market. So one guy in my comments said something really interesting about that. And he pointed out, he's like, there's people now, there's a big fad on YouTube in particular, and he thought I was interesting because I was the only YouTuber not doing this. But a lot of YouTubers basically will just say, oh, the PS2 was always going to be a big hit, and it was because of how great all the games were, and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, right, but that's revisionist history. People forget the PlayStation 2 came out with like one of the worst launch lineups ever. It had almost nothing worth playing on it for quite some time. But people were buying it anyway because it supported backwards compatibility, as well as it had DVD support, which really, again, was a big deal. But he said the proof of that is that if you look at the sales of the console, which is about 160 million units, he said like the highest selling game on the system is like 17 million. It's not even close to the number of units sold. Meaning that the adoption rate wasn't necessarily about the console. And we only have one other example of this in our history, which is the Switch, because it's the only system even close, really. And he said the fascinating thing about that is that like 150 million units of the Switch, I think he said, I think it was Mario Kart 8, has sold over 60 million copies, which is a much higher rate. Where people are clearly buying it for one particular thing. I mean, even on the Wii U, a system that failed outright, it only sold 10 million units. Mario Kart 8 sold over 2 million units on that system, which tells you a lot about how much people wanted that game or that system for that game. And it makes sense why Nintendo is probably going to launch Switch 2 with Mario Kart 9, etc., but that's a different story. So it is an interesting point, I think, that happened. And at the same time, people in the comments, you would get people who say like, hey man, I bought it for the games and blah blah blah. And it's like, that's fine, it doesn't matter why you bought it. You're a gamer, you're watching a retro gamer talk about the history of a retro game console. You're obviously there for the games. But not everyone is. The argument was always exactly, the argument was like, I didn't know anybody who bought it for just DVDs. Meanwhile, I had different people in the comments being like, yeah, my mom bought it for me because she knew it was a DVD player and then she could use it. So it's like, I knew people personally. I actually had that exact scenario happen. I had a friend of mine whose parents were not really anti-video game, but he was allowed to get one like every few years. You know, it's just a house rule. You can have one like every few years. And he had a Dreamcast, but like a year later, his parents suddenly got a PlayStation 2. And I was like, I thought you weren't allowed to do that. And he's like, oh, they bought it because it's a DVD player. I'm not even sure they know it plays video games. So I just can buy games and play them myself. You know, and he did, you know, that's how it worked. Because to a lot of parents, that's not what it was. It wasn't a game console. It was a DVD player. In a different timeline where the PlayStation 2 failed and ended up being more like the new one, it is really hard to understand what the ramifications of that would have been. Like you initially pitched the idea that Sega might still be making consoles. That's assuming people bought it. I mean, as much as it would be easy to point and say, hey, Sony is the reason Sega stopped, Sega is the reason Sega stopped. They made a ton of terrible internal decisions, and the PlayStation 2 flopping probably would have helped them. I don't deny that. But I don't know if it necessarily would have actually solved anything. It probably would have been a little bit easier to justify to people to buy one since the PlayStation 2 was a failure. I don't know. But I don't necessarily think that would have actually panned out like in some massive way. And on the flip side, I don't know if Microsoft would have ended up making a console, because you got to remember, one of their core reasons they ever entered the console market at all was they didn't like the direction Sony was taking entertainment in. They saw the home console, the video game console, as weird as it sounds now, as a threat to the concept of the PC. And they didn't want to have no say in where that industry was going. But if Sony failed, they'd be like, oh yeah, no, this is still just for babies and children. Maybe they wouldn't have cared. Obviously, I don't know that, but it's not impossible to think. Or they would have been like, well, Sony failed and they were the only serious ones, so we can continue to just work alongside Sega and kind of veer it ourselves rather than make hardware. I don't know. Obviously, we don't know that timeline of events, but I guess it's not impossible to think that had the PS2 failed, Nintendo probably would have been very similar. They probably would have continued to make consoles. They probably would have not ever done the Wii. I agree with you on that. They probably would have just been like, well, we'll do our incremental upgrades rather than generational upgrades, or they wouldn't have, in the case of the Wii, held the entire hardware back effectively a generation and said, like, we'll just add a gimmick. They probably would have just kind of done things by the beat of their own drum as they do, but rather than market responding to not wanting to directly compete technologically, they would have more or less set the tone for what the technology was going to be. And if Sega survived, they probably would have followed suit, and the two of them would have continued to duke it out. Would they both still be around now? I have no idea. You know, Nintendo probably would be, but Sega, I don't know. But that's my guess. But hey, anybody's guess is as good as anybody else's.
It's a very similar point of view that I've taken, although, as you said, with Sega, will they fail or not really also matters. Not just because the PS2, yes, it had a factor in killing the Dreamcast numbers, but at the same time, it's not the only factor. So that's also one thing one might count on, but I do still think that even if the PS2 wasn't that big of a success, the Dreamcast would have maybe extended its life for a bit, or give Sega
definitely
a chance.
It would have extended. It would have extended. It wouldn't have halted as abruptly as it did. But the question is, does it last 6 more months, a year, 10 years? You know, we don't know. But I guess maybe I'm unfairly putting you in this box, but typically a lot of Dreamcast fans, fanatics, I should say, have a tendency to believe that if the PlayStation 2 didn't exist, then it would have been the Dreamcast that sold, 150, 160 million units, whatever it is. Dreamcast sold like a little over 10 million units, actually very similar numbers to the Wii U. And in this timeline where the PS2 doesn't exist, like, does it make it to 15 million, 20 million, 60 million? Hard to say. Because, again, we don't know the other factors. If Microsoft would have jumped in, I'm not really sure they would have. Hell, if Microsoft worked more with Sega, maybe that original idea, the two of them making a console together, would have eventually been a thing. Again, we don't know any of this, but I don't think that the Dreamcast, even without the PlayStation 2's success, I don't think it could have ever reached the same numbers the PS2 got, or even really a shadow of it. But that's just me.
Yeah, and you have to take into account, compared to Sega and Nintendo, Sony was relatively newer in the market than them, so they may have done such a decision when they saw that, oh, okay, it didn't work out, we're new to this anyway, let's just back out.
Yeah, that actually very well could have happened. It could have been this thing. Remember that one time Sony made a console that was awesome, and then they made another one that sucked, and everybody forgot about them? Like, literally, that, even though that sounds ridiculous to us on the surface, there are people in Japan that will tell you that's exactly what happened to NEC. One of the biggest computer companies in the world did exactly what I just described. They made one of the most successful, iconic video game consoles ever, followed it up, it failed, and they stopped, and everybody just has vague memories of it. Like, that could have happened, and it would have been interesting to see that timeline. Maybe we'll save that discussion for another time. Another one where the PCFX ends up being a big hit. But maybe another time. Anyway, so anything else you want to add to this?
Nope, I'm all good.
All right, then that will do it for us. So, Abdullah, obviously, huge shout out to you. Thank you very much, as always, for joining me. Thank you to Sinjeet for that subject, and of course thank you to Spencer Puryear for the subject he had, Joseph for joining me earlier as well and his subjects, and once again round of shout outs to Jeb Malcolm, Loke, Michael Kelly, Sega Steve, and Trey Wagner. Once again, that is Jeb Malcolm, Loke, Michael Kelly, Sega Steve, and Trey Wagner. Thank you very much to all you guys. Thank you everybody for listening. If you could, please like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, and check out all the social media stuff in the description: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, obviously, my Spreadshirt, and my travel channel. I appreciate the support on those platforms. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all later.